706-9923 and enter webinar ID 976-1599-8775. Telephone users may dial *9 to request to speak after joining the meeting. Computer and app users may use the raise hand feature to request to speak. So thank you all for joining us remotely this evening. My stepfather really wants to check on me. I'm going to continue to swipe him away. Okay. Sorry. He'll give up eventually. Per our agenda, I'll start off with public participation. Do we have anybody in the audience who would like to speak at this time? I don't see any raised hands, so I'm going to move forward. Okay, next item on the agenda is a presentation by two members from our community. So if we could go ahead and add Alan Nitschelm and Charlie Kadlec to the meeting. They will be presenting regarding financial planning and ABRSD enrollment.
Charlie will be joining the panel in a moment, but Alan is not present in the meeting currently.
Okay. Margaret Cohen has their hand raised. I don't know if that's related at all.
Yes, it is.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm using Margaret Cohen's computer because she's my wife.
Sounds fair.
I don't see a video, so I don't know. Oh, join as a panelist. Is that what I do?
Yes.
Okay. Looks like, hi, I'm Margaret Cohen.
You are.
Very good.
Looking good. All right. So Charlie and Alan asked for some of our time for a 10-minute presentation. So we're going to allow them that time. I will go ahead and share my screen when they are ready for their presentation, and we'll let them take it away.
Is Charlie online, did you say?
Yeah.
Oh, I see him.
Here I am. I thought you wouldn't have my photo. That'd be terrible.
Oh, there.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Charlie Kadlec, for those of you who may not know that. And we'll make this quick and to the point. I think you have all received a copy of our presentation, but if Christine would do us the favor of putting the slides on the screen, I can talk to them.
I sure will do that. Give me just 1 second here. Make sure I've got it. Okay. And now I will share this.
Okay, here's the first one. It's pretty obvious. I'm not going to read things which you can read yourselves, but this shows the rather significant decrease in K through 6 enrollment over the last 14, 15 years. And next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
And each year, the schools report their enrollment to the State Department of Education, Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, which is, my computer's doing something. Oh, here we go. Which uses that.
It's like we're having some difficulty with Charlie's connection. Alan, do you want to go from here, or do you want to give a minute for Charlie to come back online?
I can talk until he gets connects again. Oh,
Am I on?
You're on now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, I was told a long time ago that the this report has to be confirmed by a member of the school administration. So it's pretty reliable information. That's the point. What you look at, and each year in roughly November, the school administration does a presentation on the enrollment to the school committee. This is one of the slides from their November 2019 presentation. The vertical line is this year or 2 years ago. It starts roughly at 2005-6 and goes to 2029-30. And as you can see, on the left side of the vertical line, it's decreasing, and then it starts, the enrollment K through 6 projected starts to increase rather substantially. And please, next slide.
Let me make a comment on that one. This was the slide that was shown to the special town meeting in 2019 that approved the new school building.
Correct. And 2 years later, which is just a couple of months ago, this is the slide of enrollment that was shown to the school committee. The part prior to the current year, there's no vertical line, but it's roughly in the middle. It's the same as before, but the projections for the next 10 years or so rather drastically changed from going steeply up to going horizontal or slightly down. That's what caught Alan's attention. He deserves credit for taking a look at this. So we started looking at it further. And I have one more slide. This is the collection of all the projections listed on the right side. It's not a very clear slide, but you get the idea. The black line is the actuals, that hasn't changed. But each year there is a projection made by this company called NESD, NSDEC, NEDSC. We don't know who they are, but that's somebody the schools hire to do the projections. The projections are essentially useless. You can see for yourself, they go up, they go down, they stay horizontal. Why? Somebody else will have to explain. But the point is, right now, on the left side, the actuals has been a fairly steady decrease, which amounts to, from the first slide, 563 kids from K through 6 already. And that's more than how many kids there are in any one of the now 6 elementary schools today. For example, Conan, I'm looking for my notes. Conan has 403 right now, although its capacity is listed at 307. Some people, Steve Noon and others, might remember that when Conan was built for 500 kids, but that's all changed. That's previous century. But in any case, this is what we wanted to start to show you, that there's every indication, excuse me, that the enrollment, which is already way down, is going to keep staying low or even decrease. We don't know what the projections are, but the ones that the schools use to repeat, we think are pretty useless. Alan, go ahead.
Okay, next slide, please. I tried to spend a little time looking at some of the data just to get a better handle on what might be driving lower enrollments, not only for the last 15 years, but also in the future. And I found a couple of very interesting things. This is from the census. And basically birth rates, the number of births has been dropping consistently every single year for several years. And you can see the lowest full line is 2020, and that's way down. Even from the year before, it's probably down 10% from the middle of the pack there. And in 2021, it immediately dropped again, but then sort of came back to the 2020 level, which is where it is about now. So you're looking at, maybe 10% fewer births, which is going to have a dramatic increase, I think, into the future. Next slide, please. Another thing that I looked at was which women are having fewer babies. And it turns out that the highly educated master's and doctorate women are the ones who have the greatest drop in the number of births, which obviously doesn't bode well for Acton because that's a lot of our population. Next slide. So what we're recommending is that FinCom sort of take charge of this issue now, because doing long-range planning is FinCom's job. And we recommend that you form a standing committee, because we think this is a job that will take several years, not just a short study. And I'll talk about that in a second. So what we're proposing that you look at is whether closing one of the elementary schools, namely Conant, would save significant money, and if you can make the financial case to do so. So, our back of the envelope calculation is it saves, $2 to $3 million a year in operating costs to have 5 schools instead of 6, and you'd save a school building project, which could be $50 or $75 million. And to study this and then go to town meeting, because that's who you report to, and educate voters, taxpayers about this issue, and give them a recommendation based on your research and your debate and discussion. Next slide. The reason we think it should be a standing committee is because this will be a multi-year process. Maybe it would happen more quickly, or maybe it would happen more slowly. But if it takes, let's say, 2 or 3 years, there's going to be things unfolding as time goes on. You're going to have projects that people want to spend money on to keep Conant going. Like, say, a new roof comes up. How much are you going to spend on that if you're going to retire the building? So sort of looking at things from, with the idea that we're going to have this change coming up. And maybe even look into ways to start reducing the student population of Conant in preparation. Next slide. And then the last thing is, obviously, you can have forecasts. We're trying to rely on the actuals to some degree. But if it looks like the forecasts are starting to turn around and all of a sudden we're going to get a large influx of students, that's something that you guys could keep an eye on as well. And, maybe say, maybe we need to open up a sixth school. The point is that if the enrollment projections change and they start going back up again, it will take several years before we add another 500 students back. Because the way it works is the large increase starts in kindergarten, and then it propagates every year into a higher grade. So the expected increase, if you had 500 kids, it would start with 100 in kindergarten, and then an extra 100 in kindergarten first grade, then an extra 100 in kindergarten first and second, etc. So it actually takes several years to build back up again. And in the meantime, if we go with a 5 elementary school model, we save millions of dollars a year that we can put in the bank. So delaying the building project is not going to hurt, it's going to help. Next slide.
I'll jump in for a second.
Sure.
One of the reasons we're thinking it may take several years, because we had that experience decades ago when the Merriam building was closed. It took a few years to get the whole town to basically accept it, because people get connected to a school and there are all kinds of emotional reasons. So it takes a while. That's the whole point. Also, it may not take so long if the some of the financial projections on nationally turn out to be correct, but we don't know that.
Right.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the main thing is to get an independent, unbiased body like FinCom that can represent taxpayers. The problem with leaving this to the school district is that many of the people involved in that are thinking first of the schools, which is very understandable. But people also need to think about the taxpayers. And I think weighing different options, you need to have different constituencies represented. So FinCom could represent taxpayers, could be looking at things like the projections, verifying them, et cetera, and guiding the school in making this transition if that's something that town meeting approves of.
One more thing, I'll jump in. It, by coincidence, some of you may know, some of you may not. Peter Light, superintendent, this afternoon held a meeting with staff where he told them that the schools have a $1.5 million deficit this year, and that's due primarily. I wasn't there, just a second hand, but seems correct. Switching to full-time kindergarten is part of the additional cost. There was some mention apparently of the operating cost of the new building being higher than expected, although we haven't opened it yet. Other things, and what Peter was telling his staff is that there will be some reductions in personnel. Who and how many, I don't know. I don't want to speculate, but the schools are obviously already having financial problems.
Okay, and I think the last slide. That's it. So we're urging a specific plan of action. Form a committee, look at this, prepare something for a town meeting, begin to educate the public on this issue, and get the sense of town meeting. Do people want to save this money and lower their tax bills or their future tax increases? Get that feedback and then act accordingly. If there's support at town meeting, then maybe you continue with that effort and you assist the schools. Obviously, if there's not support at town meeting, then you stop. And then if you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to try and answer them.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Everybody has access to this slide presentation. I can always share it again, but if I stop, then I can actually see everybody who's on here, which makes my job a little easier. So I will open it up to the Finance Committee. Does anybody have any questions specifically that they'd like to ask Alan or Charlie? And then after we have gone through our questioning with them, we'll go ahead and have our own conversation as a committee. So if anybody who has questions, please raise your hand now. Steve.
Yeah, Charlie, Allen, whichever one, take it. But do we have any idea why the projection changed so much? Yeah, I understand births are going down, but that was a very large swing in a projection in a matter of 2 years.
Exactly, and I'll speak just for myself because Alan and I have discussed it, but he can answer and I will too. My answer is I have no idea.
So I looked at these numbers very carefully back in 2019 when the school building project was presented. And in 2016, the line was flat like it is in 2021. In 2017, the numbers went up dramatically. 2018, they were up. 2019, they were up. Then in 2020, they came down a little bit, and then they had the big drop in 2021. So something happened in the prediction model. I don't think there was any. I mean, you're talking about predicting something 10 years in the future, and it shouldn't change that quickly. So there is some mystery as to how this occurred. I don't think we really know, but I did do some analysis of the numbers, and I could talk about that if anyone's interested as to, mathematically what happened. There is an answer that I can give you, but it might be a little bit too much in the weeds if you want to hear it. But
Yeah, I mean, if the other people do, I was going to say that at that time we had the, whatever it is, NESDEC numbers. We also had projections that the Ashtons did. And they'd been doing it for a matter of a long time. I recall there might have been differences in the two projections at the time. Jason, you might recall better. But I don't think they were as far off as what we're seeing in these changes in the projections. I think they both showed some increase. But as to the substance of your presentation, yeah, I've been saying for a while that it's nice that both the town and the schools both now have a 10-year CIP program. Actually, it's more than nice. We've been talking about that for years. But there is no overlaying one on the other in terms of it's going to have an impact on the taxpayers. So as we get into this evening's discussions, we start talking about town budgets and how many miles of sidewalks do we want to put in? Well, if there's a $60 million school out there in the not too distant future, and let's face it, Conant is as old as Douglas and Gates, and not in any better shape than they were. So I think we need to take a look at this.
Okay, go ahead, Adam, and then I'll go to Christy.
Yes, thank you. Did the agencies that produce these estimates for us have a response regarding why the change and why the change was so dramatic?
I think the school could be asked that question.
Yeah.
I tried to explore that back in 2019 when I first saw the dramatic increase from 2016. I actually asked the school, Peter Light, if I could talk to someone at NESDEC to get some insight into this, and I was not allowed to do so. So I was not able to investigate this, let's say from a journalism point of view or something like that. I do think, Marie Altieri is the expert. She's the one who presents this information. You could invite her to a FinCom meeting, or if the subcommittee was formed, and I meet with her, and I'd love to go to that and listen and be able to ask questions as well. If you go to a school committee meeting, the public really can't ask questions. They give you a 2-minute limit, and they do not answer questions at the time. So you guys have the power to investigate this to some degree, and if you had a committee dedicated to it, it could really follow the issues and follow the answers. I think you could get to the bottom line of it. But it was very disturbing back in 2019, but I had to drop it because what could I do? And the thing was approved and it was water under the bridge. But now, with the Conant issue that will surely come up in the coming few years, it's a good time to look at this again. And we can actually, as I said to someone once, everyone has said this expression, take lemons and turn it into lemonade. We got a new school building. Let's use it, and let's retire the one that we no longer need because we don't need that capacity anymore.
Okay, I will jump in here and add 2 points before I go to Christy. One is that when the new school building project was being considered, the MSBA ran their own projections independently of ours and ultimately adjusted slightly higher than where we had started as far as their enrollment projections for our town. So it seems that, some of the forecasting and models for student enrollment is, more mysterious than one would hope as far as gaining data. And then the other thing I would point out is there's been a nationwide trend towards reduced return to full enrollment once everybody went remote for the pandemic. And I think that that's probably also impacting the coming years and the coming projections. So with those thoughts in mind, go ahead, Christy, and then I'll go to Dave.
Following what Christine said, anecdotally, I know parents who have switched their kids to private schools or even gone to homeschooling in the current situation because they aren't comfortable with the conditions of having their kids in school full time. So goodness knows how that'll play out. That can't have been part of any long-term models, really. What I want to ask about is the number you have on there for the potential cost of renovating Conan. Where did you get that number from, or that range?
It's basically assuming we would build a new building.
Okay.
I don't think Conan is renovatable. It's 50, 60 years old. It's the same as Gates and Douglas. And
I remember when they looked at Douglas, it was going to be like 90 some odd, I'm sure Jason knows the number, 90 some odd $1 million to abate and fix it.
Well, I mean, that's more expensive than just building.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering. You're presenting a much smaller number than I was expecting. I was wondering what that.
We're not trying to give you the numbers. We're really trying to get you guys to take the ball and study it and come up with a number that you can publicize and defend based on some real research. This is a back of the envelope thing.
Okay, thank you.
If I may quickly, there was a series of engineering studies done for the school committee before they decided to do the new boardwalk building. And I remember one number was to repair, renovate the existing buildings was more expensive than to build a new one.
Yeah.
But
Thank
anyway, those were just guesses on our part.
Okay. All right, Dave, you had your hand up earlier. Do you still have a question?
Yeah, just one. Thanks for the presentation. And just to belabor the point, obviously school enrollment is a critical thing. And, thanks for bringing this more to our attention. I think, we had discussed it lightly in the past. But, I guess my question is, when we talked about the school in 2019, the Boardwalk campus, my understanding, and I think the data showed that a lot of the schools are running outside of their current capacity. We're all familiar with modular trailers and the additions to some of the campuses to increase classroom space. How do you think about that in the context of Conant? And I say that meaning that, the Boardwalk campus, I think, pretty meaningfully improved school capacity. But this is coming from running at well over capacity for some time. I'm just curious how Alan and Charlie thought about that.
I'll start by saying the capacity has changed considerably over time. There was a time when we had well over 5,000. I don't have the number, but one of the oldest kids had 400 kids in their class, that kind of numbers. Again, we had more than 500-600 kids for every elementary school building for a while. Now to repeat, the Conan School is rated at 307. It's got 20 classrooms. I don't know how I don't know what determines that. I know there's a lot of discussion about having one-on-one spaces for helping kids that need that extra help and so on. So the definition of building capacity is something that's very fluid. And when you say it's over capacity, it's over whatever number the school committee decides to use for that particular year.
I would just add that, there is a lot of flexibility in the buildings that we have. The new Boardwalk School has a third school in it, the pre-K, that they're going to move, I guess, from the administration building. And that could easily hold another 100, 150 students. So if capacity in the future starts to get challenging, that could be one way to mitigate that. But I think the underlying thing here is to not try and guess every scenario now, but it's to actually look at the data and study it and try and figure out what is the best way forward from a long range planning point of view. And the other point is just to reiterate that if, I think at this point we definitely could accommodate it. I mean, if you said we had 2,500 students now, and if we had 5 buildings and the kids were in 5 buildings, we would not build a 6th building because we can accommodate 2,505. We have a lot of new buildings, and they can handle it because they've handled it in the past. But if enrollment does start to go up, we can always start a building project. We'll have several years. So I'm trying to bring this to people's attention now before a building project is reflexively started, because people will assume, oh, we're just going to rebuild Conan. Why not just rebuild it? Well, there's a reason to examine this first, and we should do it now before that process begins.
The new building, the new boardwalk school has 174,000 square feet, and Douglas and Gates are roughly 50,000 each. So we're going to build a new space, 174,000 square feet, and demolish 100. So we have a net gain of maybe 70,000 square feet just by having the new building.
Okay, go ahead, Jason.
Thank you. First of all, the comment about the capacity in the school being set by the school district. It's not the school district that sets the capacity recommendations and guidelines. That actually comes, I believe, from DESI, or at least from a statewide organization. So it's not at the whim of the ABRSD or the ABRSC. So I do want to just be clear about that. And to what Mr. Wellenhoff said, yes, I was actually trying to find the slide, but I don't have it at my fingertips. Every single one of our schools was over capacity when we undertook the new twin school, the boardwalk school. Also, by all means, let's take a look at it. Let's definitely do our due diligence on this. But just because there's enough, just because the numbers of the enrolled students have gone down by approximately a school's worth, I don't think that accounts for, we'll look at it, I don't think that accounts for where the capacity levels were. And I would also just, when we go to look at this, please make sure everyone pay attention to the hometown guarantee that's in the regional school district. It's not like we could reapportion it across all the schools independently. We have to make sure to be able to account for the hometown guarantee that's in the regional school district.
I think that does not apply to Foxborough, or is that for Acton too? I think it's Foxborough, isn't it?
It is a hometown guarantee.
He just says you cannot show
your hometown. We have to accommodate it.
Okay.
Well, these are, just to quickly, I mean, these are all excellent points, and to repeat what Alan said, all we're doing now is sort of bringing this to your attention, the detail. What's
just throwing out things we should keep in mind as we do our analysis of this. Let's see. There was also to what Mr. Noon said earlier about the Ashton projections. This was, I believe, 8 years ago, and I say that because it was the year before I joined FinCom. The projection was actually for a loss of 1,000 students over the next 10 years. That has not at all come to pass. Other things that I want us to keep in mind as we do our analysis, if you look at the enrollment in town, just like anything else, if you take a long enough view, it becomes a sinusoidal curve. So let's just find out if we're in the trough of the sinusoidal curve or not. I definitely believe there could be COVID impacts on the current enrollment. So let's see how that shakes out. To Alan and Charlie, just because I'm quite confident that you're going to make a similar presentation at town meeting, which is perfectly acceptable. I would say I would not rely on federal birth rates. I would do your best to try and hone in on something that's a little more specific to the town. And one of the things that I routinely ask for of Mr. Barrett and Mr. Mullen is the housing turnover. I think that has more impact on the enrollment in our town than births, even at Emerson. In fact, that was one of the metrics that was used by the Ashtons that I said I didn't have any faith in at all. housing turnover has a much greater impact on the demographics of the town. To that end, I would also suggest as we go through this that we ask for something that we already do. If you look at our point of view that we presented to the select board last night, we do call out the percentage of the households that have children or residents under the age of 18, which is data that gets lifted directly from the registrar's census, which should be topical to everyone on this call because we received it in the last week and we have less than 10 days to get it back to the town. So that should be a wealth of information to help with the near-term forecast. I understand fully about needing to do long-term, but from a near-term forecast, what the town registrar sees and what the housing turnover is, number of units turned over in the last 12 to 18 months has a huge impact on the enrollment in the school district. I don't have any questions for Alan and Charlie at this time.
Okay.
If I could just comment on that quickly.
Quickly, sure. Thank you.
A couple quick things. You mentioned COVID as being a possible driver. I don't think COVID is going to be a positive driver. It's only going to be a negative driver. So if anything, this will make the future projections lower. The other thing is Charlie and I are not planning on going to town meeting. We're hoping FinCom will take this ball and run it. If they do, and you guys can do your work quickly, maybe you can present something at the upcoming town meeting, which we would be happy to support and applaud you for. So I think there's time to do that, and we hope that's one of the reasons we tried to get here as quickly as we could once we saw the recent projections from the school committee. So if this can happen quickly, great, and we urge you to do so.
All right. Thank you both for joining us and for presenting and bringing this to our attention. And we will bid you a good night and then go ahead with a quick discussion following.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank-
All right, Matt, if you're listening and could go ahead and
We could
Move
be
back.
being demoted.
you are being demoted. I'm sorry. Or Mr. Barrett, do you have the ability? I'm afraid I'm not an owner here. There we go.
You got
All
it
right.
lost that. Here we go. Yeah.
It's we're good. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm open to hearing if we feel that this is a priority and how we should approach looking into it. And I'll hear from Jason and especially anybody who has systemic information that I don't have about how FinCom would go ahead and proceed in a situation like this. So go ahead, Jason.
I'm all for us taking a look at it. I don't think we need to have a standing subcommittee. I think that this is part of our regular remit. This is the type of thing that we oversee every year. We wouldn't allow for a zombie school to exist in town, and we absolutely pay attention to trying to get the most efficiencies out of everything that we oversee. I'm more than happy to run the numbers and see where the schools lie in capacity at this time and present that as a finding. That's absolutely something I think we should sign up to do. I don't see a need to have a standing committee to do this. This is part of what we do every year. It's part of what we do every year. And I do think it is something that when we go back to the town clerk and ask for that demographic information, this is part of the reason why we're asking for it, because we do want to have a good understanding of the near-term potential swings. I would also say that shutting down a school and then having to start one back up after you mothball it is extremely expensive and is not something that you can turn on a dime and suddenly make it better. Furthermore, I think that the effects of COVID are absolutely to be determined. I understand Mr. Nitschelm's comment about COVID would only be a negative. I'm not sure of that. I'm not sure of that, because if you look at a brand new school that has state-of-the-art HVAC and you've got a 1/3 chance of getting into it, hey, if you're on the bubble about which town to move into, that could have an impact. So I'm not guaranteeing that it will, but I'm saying COVID is a gigantic question mark, and only fools make prognostications when looking at COVID. I don't see, well, I'm good. I also don't think relying on federal trends for federal birth trends for something as small as the town of Acton in one state is a good idea. And I honestly don't understand how the educational makeup of the town of Acton would have an impact on who chooses to move into this town. We've always known that people move into Acton for the school district.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else? Steve, go ahead.
So I also think we should look at it. I don't know whether we need a standing committee for this particular issue, but I will say that in the past we have had standing subcommittees on things like OPEB, on long-range planning, and I wouldn't be opposed to the idea of having a standing subcommittee on long-range planning, because I think, like I was saying earlier, we have 2 CIP programs, but we haven't really meshed them together. We don't know what the impact on the taxpayer will be 5 years out, and at least in my opinion, that's something we need to worry about. We need to worry about hitting them with a new school and $30 million worth of sidewalks in the same year, you know. So there's something to be said for a standing committee, maybe not on a specific issue like this, but it's part of a broader issue that I do think we need to look at and keep looking at.
Okay. I'm going to do my best to take everybody's hands as I saw them, but unfortunately all of the pictures keep moving around on my screen. I think I've gotten them to stop, but I'm going to go with Christy and then Dave, and then I'll move on from there.
I'm with Steve on needing to mesh the projections of both the town, the budgetary projections of both the town and the school, having looked through the SIP today and the town budget. Again, there's, even within the town budget versus the SIP, there isn't all the data in one place that we need to see to get a good overview. I, for one, would like to know more about the schools in terms of the changes in room requirements. There's a lot more ELL, reading specialists, et cetera, that have changed the needs for special services outside of the classrooms from when those buildings were first done. So it might very well be that we have a decline in school age population, but need more classrooms to cover those kids. So I think there's a lot of stuff that it would benefit us to learn in terms of a change in school resources requirements going forward. And I like Steve's idea of just having a general more focus on long-term planning. I agree with Jason, this is what we should be doing, but there's always, with anything, there's a million things we should be doing. And I think now is a good time to prioritize this project.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts from my end. One is, I think we probably do just need to level set on terminology. I use the word capacity, and how much of the schools are currently occupied, forecasted to be occupied down the road. And I think it's important to understand that. And then a couple other quick points is to Charlie's points on the forecasting. We do see the actual trends. They have declined. This is a really important and significant change over the past 3 or 4 years. But the forecasts clearly are all over the map, in some cases dramatically inaccurate, and maybe just coincidentally, maybe they can be dead on. But I think it's hard to rely on that, or even reproducing our own methodology. To Jason's point, I remember when the Ashtons presented, I specifically also remember them mentioning housing turnover as one of the key determinants of what impacts the school forecast. The school, one of the slide decks Christine had sent around indicated birth rates was also an important part of that, but we all know, younger families looking to start, younger prospective parents, looking to start families, move into town, go to the schools, and then stay in town over time, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we don't want to get too cute with understanding the forecast, but we do want to, accept the fact that they have been dramatically wrong and the trend has been down. I do think there's something to be said, though, about understanding the overcapacity that was, the overutilization, rather, that was pre-Douglas Gates, opening at some point later this year, what have you, is, those schools, in some cases, when they had presented this information, was at 110 or 120%. So I don't know how to look at that data. I know we operated in that environment for a long time, and I think to most people it was not what we wanted. But to Jason's point, his earlier point in this part of the meeting, I think we want to get a handle on all of that and just have a common sense of what those definitions are. So I like the idea of, maybe it's part of a long range planning committee and having this be a project under that. I'm not sure it needs its own specific subcommittee, but I do also just want to thank Charlie and Alan for coming to us and just, planting the seed for thinking about this sorts of stuff, because I think it is right in our wheelhouse to think about.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, first of all, I have to apologize for being late. I was here listening. We're just having some serious hardware complications and wasn't able to log on. I think it's a very important. I appreciate Charlie and Alan for doing that exercise, but with any kind of forecast, as we know, what Chris can well knows, that when you come up with data or you come up with a projection, you have to be able to document your methodology, how you got there. Science is science, Another independent scientist has to be able to reproduce, findings from another scientist if it was, following his methodology. So that, and with these forecasts, we need to know how they got there and what process, what steps they took, so that we could research that and basically validate it, just versus them just using their say so. We have to be able to independently validate those numbers, because it was obviously it could be tens of millions of dollars are at stake in the long run, and this projection, the big change from several years ago, is significant, and it should be an embarrassment to the town. Who knows what the long-term impact of that or the implications of that will be? But we need to find out. We need to, as Steve said, it should be a sort of an ongoing committee or a group that looks into these numbers and are able to validate them. That's just my opinion.
I will point out that if anybody's interested, somewhere in the documentation process and the journey for the new building project, the MSBA's enrollment projection numbers are definitely embedded in documents there. So, it's not a single source that came to this conclusion, and it's not, an Acton-based source that came to this conclusion. There are a few. In fact, I think NESDEC is the only one right now locally that the school has access to that does projections. And once the Ashtons retired, that's what they were left with. So they use those projections along with the other data that they take in. And again, the MSBA ran their own independent graphs of where they thought our enrollment numbers would lie. Go ahead, Adam, and then Roland.
Thanks. So I think that Charlie and Alan pay each of us on the finance committee a great compliment by asking us to form a standing committee to come up with our own estimates for enrollment. They're basically saying that they trust us and believe that we can do a better job. and come up with a more accurate figure than what's been presented in the past. But what seems apparent to me is that if three completely separate reporting agencies have made estimates at it and they've all had the same margin for error as the other, then it must be a much more complex issue than projecting things like revenues and costs. Certainly, as the type of thing that personally I would like to tinker with, but I think the time is probably better spent focusing on things that we can estimate and manage better, which would be things such as the cost drivers, the building side of it, the capital side of it, which was the other half that they alluded to, managing that part of it. I think it'd be very simple to come up with, some pretty good enrollment projections. I would think easily within 10% of accuracy on a year-by-year basis. But I think once you start looking out 3 years and beyond, I suspect you're going to get the same sort of wide frequencies that we're seeing in the current projections. So those are my comments.
Okay, go ahead, Roland, and then I'll go back to Jason. I see a lot of hands still up, so if you've already had your question answered, please go ahead and put it down, and I'd like to wrap this discussion up fairly quickly. But go ahead, Roland.
Thank you. I'm going to turn off my camera because I seem to be having some buffering issues. I appreciate that Charlie and Alan brought this forward to us to have us take a look. We have some big things on our plate coming up. We know that with sidewalks and transfer for DPW facilities, etc. But I think one of the big drivers on enrollment is our housing stock turnover. In the past year, 2 years, we've seen a big jump in turnover into town, especially in my neighborhood. I've seen last summer, I don't know how many homes sold when they sold fast. House next door to me moved in, had a kid. Next door on the other side moved in a couple of years before, just had a child. Another one just had a child in my neighborhood. So I think these things are kind of hard to predict. And also new growth in the town, building new homes that are big, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, etc. You're going to see an impact. And it's happening in Foxborough as well. So I just think we need to be cognizant of that. I don't know how to get to the data to really get to where we need to be. And it seems like these other agencies that had struggled with it in the past, and I don't see how we would struggle ourselves with it. But I think we do need to take a look at it, and I just don't think we need a standing committee.
Okay, go ahead, Jason.
I just wanted to remind that when we were doing the twin school, the boardwalk school, it was not a guarantee that we were just of what we were going to build, right? We went through a whole process of making sure that we identified the right fit. And when you look at Conan, which is the next worst physical plant in our process, it's not a knee-jerk promise that we're going to rebuild Conan as is. As a case in point, there was quite a bit of conversation about potentially migrating from a 611 process to a 621 rather than being K through 6, go to K5 and then move junior high into being middle school 6, 7, 8 if the numbers warranted it. So it's and that did not win out last time. That was not the preferred path, but that's the type of workshopping, re-envisioning, planning that goes into any massive project. So it's not a guarantee that just because Conan is currently a standalone building, that if it gets rebuilt, it would be another standalone building. There is a case to be made if there is any large capital project in the future, let's get out of the administration building altogether. Personally, I would rather see us abandon the administration building than put more money into it, but that's a separate topic.
Okay, Dave and Mike, your hands are still raised officially, digitally. Do you both have comments you want to make, or are you good? Okay, excellent. Okay, so what I think I'm hearing is that it would be great if we had some sort of group, subcommittee, whatever we want to call it, that focused on merging the CIP from the town and the CIP from the schools with a eye on potential on a potential new school building project and what the needs for the school system would be in regards to our capital planning. So I think if everybody kind of nods in agreement that seems like a good idea, and we will of course consider what Charlie and Alan have brought before us, then we'll just go ahead and talk about that at a subsequent meeting and making that official. I think that would be really useful on a lot of levels for us. Great, excellent, thank you. So the next thing on the agenda is the FY23 budget discussion of first impressions, which of course we did at our last meeting, and I seem to have simply forgotten to remove it from the budget or from the agenda. But since it's on there, does anybody have anything they would like to say at this time about the budget that you haven't already expressed? And I have forwarded all of our questions and comments onto the town manager for answering before the budget Thursday presentation. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, that was just it. I think the questions were due by tomorrow, so sounds good.
Yep, I accumulated all of the questions that we formulated at our last meeting and the ones that were sent through email, and I sent them on to the town manager. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, what at this point, what do we know about the school budget? Because I saw some documents that were attached to the agenda for their next meeting and I think Charlie was alluding to the fact that they seem to have a problem in terms of covering the budget. We can talk about the town budget, and I've talked about the town budget. But most of the money we're going to spend is coming from the other side. So I was wondering if anybody knows any more than was in the school agenda packet that I glanced through today.
No, I have had a chance to look at it, but I was hoping to attend Thursday's meeting, so.
Okay. All right, and Jason, you're in that same boat, right? I think we all know what we saw on the agenda, and then hoping to learn soon, and then I'm sure we'll have things to talk about.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead, Christy.
As I said, looking through stuff today, it occurred to me that we have ALG, which tries to bring all the information together between the schools and the town. I think it would be useful if we had a FinCom meeting where we at least did a high level, just amongst us, discussion of where everything stands. We tend to do it sort of piecemeal through the ALG updates, et cetera, but look at the SIP, look at the overall budgets, because at the end of the day, it's like Charlie and Ellen were saying, we represent the taxpayers. And I think taking one moment when we sat down together and looked at the overall picture would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. All right, if everybody's good, I'll move on to discussion of the definition of a capital improvement. Steve was able to find a document drafted by the previous capital improvement committee, and I did send that out to you all. If it's helpful, I can put it up on the screen. And Steve, maybe you could take a minute and walk us through how you came to this document, and then we can talk about whether or not we'd like to consider adopting it as something that we formalize.
Okay, we'll put it back up on the screen then.
All right, well, let me find it. I was just talking through delaying.
I was
rambling is what I was doing.
Well, I hadn't committed it to memory, so.
Can't imagine why.
So the struggle in any organization, whether they be public, private, or, is defining this question. What is a current year expense, and what is something that is capitalizable? And so you wind up setting guidelines. So if it's not a current year expense, then it has to have at least a lifespan of more than one. So that's where the first thing comes, at least 2 years. And you don't want to capitalize every last little thing you buy. So you tend to set some level of a dollar threshold. So that's where the second item comes in. And Steve Barrett, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're using $5,000 at the moment. Wake up, Steve.
He gave us a good thumbs up.
And then you get into more qualitative things. And so a capital improvement might not just be buying a new piece of equipment, it might be making a substantial alteration or change to a capital asset to make it better, give it a longer life, things that would extend its functionality. So that's under capital improvement. That's number one and number two. So if you simply are replacing something that was already in a building, then that's a repair. That should be a current year expense. So that's like painting. There was paint on the building when it was first built. If you repaint it, that's just an expense. And when you start talking about capital improvements, yeah, it's purchase of land, purchase of an asset, meaning a physical, tangible asset. And then you get into plans and studies that are preparatory to a purchase of a capital improvement. So like Kelly's Corner, all the design work that's been going in to the improvements that will be made in Kelly's Corner fall into that number 3, plans and studies in preparation for a purchase. So other than that, we're talking about things should be in the operating budget. So what does this leave out? Well, examples in the current plan are, say, any study that's not related directly to preparing for a purchase or acquisition or improvement of a capital asset. Example of that might be the money for the rewriting the zoning. A key word to keep in mind when looking at this is tangible. And a key definition that the Commonwealth DOR uses is it's got to be bondable. And things that you can't go out and borrow money against that aren't collateral, that aren't things that can be, reclaimed by the borrower if you default, tend to fall into the current operating expense budget as opposed to a capital item. So that's my take on it. Like I said, a few years ago, we tried to, because we were going through this same kind of capital planning exercise, and the first item on the agenda was, what in the heck is capital versus an operating expense? So that's where this came from. It can be tweaked. We can adapt it for current use in different ways, but the principle of capital versus expense is a question that every accountant in the history of the world has grappled with. But before you can have a capital budget, you need to make a definition.
Great, thank you. So what I would hope we could do is propose a guideline to the select board and the finance department, town manager, and get their thoughts in case we're missing something, and then make this formalized as one of our recommended policies. So this does have buy-in in a sense, in that originally the committee had FinCom and it had school committee and it had town, but none of those actors are actually still around. So even though technically the organizations were represented, they were not represented by current people currently doing the job. So given what we have in front of us, does anybody have any recommendations for language or changes or thoughts before we go ahead and send it out? Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, for putting this together. And, I like this a lot because it, I think, nicely encapsulates, to Steve's point, there's a lot of, sometimes it's art more than science on how things, should be expensed as a capital item or part of an operating budget or what have you. I would just want to mention a couple examples from the 23 budget and the capital improvement plan, which I think accentuate this. And one that comes to mind is the vehicle replacement program. Historically, the town would, as part of its normal budgeting process, buy a new police car, for example, and they're evaluating whether to lease these going forward. And so buying a police car has a very long useful life. It's an expensive item, et cetera, et cetera. I think it would be characterized as a capital asset. But now if they're leasing the vehicles and it's a recurring payment over time, is it fall under the operating budget? And the numbers can get big, if you think about it conceptually along those lines. So Steve, forgive me, but one way I generally think about everything that's on this very tightly worded, well summarized pages, is the expense recurring or not? And is it something that just happens as a normal course of business, or is it something different? Now, you have a lot of subtleties here. And for example, I really like how you have broken out, hey, we're going to study whether we need a new Department of Public Works buildings versus a traffic study. Well, one is not a capital item because there's not a capital request at the tail end of that. So long story short, I like the spirit of this and the definitions of it. I don't, just speaking offhand, I don't know how feasible it is for the finance committee to put this forward to the town manager and maybe the school to think about it this way. But I do think it has a lot of immediate application in the capital improvement plan. There are a number of items there that, were just a one-year item. There were also a lot of items that were recurring in nature. Every year being a $75,000 expense or a $50,000 expense. And I like having a framework on how to think about these things going forward. And so I support putting this forward to the town manager and Steve Barrett and the school and how they think about it. I'm not sure what sort of influence we have on that or what we're looking to get out of that. I guess maybe we should talk about that more.
Well, if I may, Christine. So I'm so old. I remember when the question of leasing capital items was a big deal in the accounting world, and we came up with a tremendously difficult concept called capitalized leases and imputed values, and Steve Barrett probably remembers that too. But everything about this whole area is somewhat open to interpretation, and I have no objection to floating this out to the schools in the town and getting their comment. They probably have some existing policy. It would be nice to get those and then maybe tweak this so that we have one that's representative that everybody can use.
I mean, just if I may, Madam Chair, is the idea that we're looking at a capital improvement plan and we're saying, this is a capital item clearly, or this is an operating item clearly. can we move it into that line item and then make those recommendations on like on just a budgetary basis, sort of on a one-off ad hoc nature? Is that sort of the thought?
My purpose in advancing this was more when I look at a long list of potential capital projects for the next 10 years, the first thing that comes to my mind is, what's the definition? I see some things in here I don't think are capital. So what am I looking at? You know, is it really a capital budget, or is it a capital budget / long-term operating budget? So I like things to be as neat as possible in characterization. So I'm trying to get at, if we're going to talk capital budgets and capital plans, I would like the town and the schools to be using similar definitions.
And I'd just like to add that when we came up with sort of a more formal policy on how we wanted the town to look at the spending of reserves, it was pointed out a bit after the fact that we didn't then take that policy and sort of present it to the select board to let them know that this was our guideline that we were going to use when looking at the budgeting process. So it's my hope that if we build some sort of framework definition, that everybody's had a little bit of time to, if not give buy-in, at least be allowed to make comment on, and that they would know where we were coming from when we commented on our beliefs on what should be in a capital portion of a budget versus operating. But go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, just one last point to that, exactly. And, when we talked about the capital improvement plan, we sent you a list of questions, and I specifically asked about the vehicle program, which involved leasing those vehicles. And I said, should this be a capital item, or is it more appropriate as an operating item? Because now it's a leased recurring payment that will sign an agreement 7 years or 5 years or whatever it is. And he said, if I remember right, it was like, this could be considered as an operating budget item. And so I really love the idea of defining this better for our uses. And maybe that sort of pushback is just sort of how we should think about this is, hey, this doesn't smell like a capital item to me. It sounds like an extra item that we're adding in that is something that is should be part of the annual budgeting process or what have you. So, no, that's great. And I think it's really good to discuss this.
I mean, the 30-second smell test is tangible, non-recurring, and long-lived. If you can answer yes on all three of those, it usually will pass as capital. If you can't answer yes on those three, then you got a debate.
Christy, go ahead.
It's what Dave was just speaking to. I think this is a good definition for what capital is. I think that there are capital items that should be part of the operating budget. As Dave was saying with the cars. I think we also can have an interesting argument. For me, this is all relative to the use of free cash and reserves and one-time capital purchases. There are things that I think are capital items that should not be purchased that way. And I forgot my other point.
Okay, anybody else have anything that they would like to add? Okay, well, then I guess, go ahead, Christy.
I would also like people to think about whether things such as public art, I'm not trying to start an argument now, public art and shade trees, where those fall in the capital spectrum, because they are both arguably necessary and important, but not something on the definition that you could be borrowing against. So please just have that in mind.
Some art's worth a lot of money.
All right, then I mean, hearing no objection, and please feel free to jump in if you have one. I think what I would like to do is go ahead and pass this around and get some feedback, and then bring it back at a later meeting, and we can discuss if we want to incorporate the feedback we get, and then we can go ahead and adopt this as a framework going forward for how we will approach looking at capital projects. Does that all sound thumbs up? Excellent. Fantastic. Okay. Oh, I'm still sharing my screen. I will stop doing that. And as far as the point of view, slide 6, which is our next budget, our next agenda item, I am still waiting on data from the town manager regarding the 2020 census, which he has been able to provide for us in the past. I've sent a couple of emails, but my understanding is that that the town staff is stretched incredibly thin right now, and that there are a lot of people out, and that they're doing the best they can with the resources they have. And so it's still out there, and I will continue to try to access it. And I know that Christy sent some, looked into the numbers a little bit as well. And we currently just don't have the data from the town manager in order to even have the discussion on whether or not we'd like to change what's in the slides. So, Christy, are you okay with going ahead and tabling this for now? All right, it sounds, Mike, you have something to say? Go ahead.
Yeah. Wrong mouse. I have two systems going here. Yeah, Christy said that the data she has, or she thinks that I have data from 2019. I used the 2020 census data, which is accurate up to April. It was completed in April 2020.
Please send me the tables you're getting it from, because the information I found was from the 2019 estimate.
Well, if you look at, just go on Google, U.S. Census data, Acton, Mass, it'll come right up.
And if you look at that data, closely, it actually is made up of data from a number of different tables, which all have different sources, including the American Community Survey. And if you look at the information from that the census has about when they're putting the information out, they say because of COVID, a lot of the information is being delayed in the production of the various tables that we need.
Yeah, but American communities, they do it every year. And do you think those numbers are going to change?
They do it every year. They do.
I mean, was there some kind of some catastrophic event that
no, what they do is an estimate.
Had families make a lot of babies or what?
Every 10 years, they do a huge survey. As we see, there's the decennial census. Every 5 years, they do a scatter shot. They do a minor survey. They're not going after everyone. They take what they hope is a appropriate sample, and then they make projections based on that. And that's what you're seeing. That's why you see a significant change at the 2015 point. And then they do projections, various amounts out from that. In the interim periods annually for a lot of the data, they'll do another one of those small subsets that they look at, and then they project the data based on having surveyed a small number of people. For the annual and 2-year ones, it's a smaller group than for the 5-year, as opposed to the 10-year census, which is everyone.
Well, what specific number do you have a problem with?
The town does a yearly census.
So
the town,
I'm talking about
go ahead, Christy.
the number of households that have children in the school system. The data you presented in the slide of the number of households with children is in the Wikipedia entry that you linked to or listed as the source. That is based on 2010 data.
Okay, but we have data. We know it's 8,500 households, and we have the population of people of children 18 and under for the town. Divide one into the other.
Okay, but that's different from the population of school-aged households, which the 2019 data also has. And that is much more comparable with the numbers we've used before. That gets us to 28% of households have school-aged children, not the 42. I think, or I'm sorry, I don't have all the numbers here in front of me. 28.7% of households in the 2019 estimate data, because I couldn't find the 2020 data, because what I read said that that wasn't going to be out until 2022. That works out to 28.7 households. 2,527 have children between the ages of 6 and 17 inclusive. I just want the data to be comparable to what we...
Why is this number important?
Because what we've said for the last few years is a different description of the number from what we have this year. People
For what purpose, though?
People have told me they've gotten a lot of power, especially parents, out of understanding that the whole town pays for schools used by, up until now, approximately 24% of the households. And that's a big difference from the 43% that we have in there. So the number suddenly jumps a ton. And I don't think is representative. It's not the same data as what we've been saying before. We need to decide what our purpose in presenting this is.
Well, the census that you get from the town basically says, how the name of the person living there and how old they are. Period.
Yes.
That's all the town asks for.
No. Well, yes.
And how many dogs you have.
But we know based on that, the same thing the state census, or the federal census does, which is that there are a certain number of children of school age in a household.
Well, I think you're going to find that the numbers that we publish in our point of view is not going to be much different unless you...
The number we publish in our point of view right now is 43%. Because
I'm going to go ahead and ask you guys to take this discussion offline. Because I don't feel like it's going anywhere right at this moment. And if you guys could share data with each other.
I have sent my data and I've seen his, so I would love to have further questions.
Okay, and then the last missing piece is the data from the town, which we're still waiting for.
I think there's an important point here that Mike and I have both sort of asked each other. I would love to understand the sense of the committee on whether we should be saying percentage of families with kids who are school-aged or percentage of families with children, because those are two significantly different numbers. Previously, we've done families with school-aged children.
Yes, and I agree that in presenting this data, it is a very impactful slide and very meaningful, especially when we're trying to talk about services that we offer outside of schools, and the need for more balance in that area. So I guess you're presenting to the committee, the question you want answered is, do we want it to have households with school-age children rather than households with children under 18? Is that accurate,
yes.
Christy? Okay, so that will drive what ends up on the slide ultimately. Does anybody have
What's the definition of school-age children?
5 to 18.
The census data right now they easily give us 6 to 17, as I said, inclusive. So if we can use that, we can use the federal census data.
Well, our point of view is that shows the number of kids from 0 to 5 years of age and from 6 to 18 years of age. I don't know how much more detail you want that, and that we have the number of households.
What the federal census data gives us is the number of households with kids from 6 to 17.
I gave you just the number of children.
And what I'm telling you is I looked at the census data and they say the number of households separately with children in that age range. Because a household could have 10 kids. You can't say, just math out how many children to household.
Well, we have, the number shows up in the head count. We have a number of households. We have a number of people in town.
Yes.
And the people, we go from age 0 to up to, Steve's age and beyond. And we slice and dice it that way. And we have it any number of ways. And these numbers are not just the U.S. Census. They come from other third parties that some of them use the U.S. Census as a reference point. But, our housing authority, they talk about the school population and growth and all that. That's included in there. It's an independent source. And I think you need to get, if you get a number, I think you need to get a second number and a third number to verify.
Mike, did you see the numbers I sent you?
Yes.
Okay. Christine, frankly, the easiest way to, or if we can get the number that we're looking for here, is to ask the school district, how many households in Acton have children in the school?
Okay. I will reach out to the school district. I'll get that number with the data sourcing behind it so that we can verify and make Mike very happy and make everybody who reads our point of view very happy. I think that it is important to understand how many of our households have children within the school system, and that's the data that we should use. Go ahead, Jason.
Related to the point of view had its maiden voyage last night when Christine presented it to the select board, and I want to congratulate her on getting through all the slides in the time allotted and in doing a good job. I would also like to say, however, that I think would be perfectly appropriate for us to go back to the select board and say, she was very polite in her reading of our opinions. Would you please read through it and understand where we disagree with you? Because I'm not sure they understood where we disagreed with them, because Christine is very diplomatic and unflappably polite, which is why she got to do the presentation and I didn't.
All right, thank you. Okay, until we have different data in front of us as a committee to make a decision on slide 6, I'm going to table it for one more meeting. We'll make sure that we do all of our homework, get all our ducks in the row before the next meeting so that everybody has data in front of them and we can make a firm decision as a committee on what we would like to see on that slide. Go ahead, Mike, real quick.
Just one last comment.
Sure.
I don't have a horse in this race, so whatever the number turns out to be is fine, as long as we have a number there. But I just have to feel comfortable that's the right number.
Great. And honestly, I'm just going to say this as a small aside, that the number that Christy and I have presented in the past, and that we have the committee has presented in the past, speaks more to the argument of declining enrollment than a lot of other indicators. So I think that if we all agree that that is something that the town needs to take a long, hard look at, then it is a great number to have presented in our point of view. And that should bear out in our subsequent point of view. If we're using the same data on each one, we should see households with school-age children declining as well. Okay. I'm going to move on to Finance Committee business. No, I'm going to move on to the assignment of outreach portion of the point of view slide, and hoping that Jason is ready to sign us all up.
I'm not, because unfortunately things have changed since the last time I did this a couple of years ago. It used to be there were email addresses for all the PTSOs. Now, in some of the PTSOs are behind a firewall is the wrong word, but an access wall where you have to be a member of the school community. So I need to find a more creative way of getting in touch with the different PTSOs. So while the process has been started, I do not have enough dates at this time to request for volunteers, but I'm actively working on it. And requests where emails are capable, requests have been sent out. Where they're not, I'm going to work other channels to make sure that I get to the appropriate contacts. I'm also going to put together a spreadsheet so that whoever does this next year can have direct access.
Okay, great. You know what? If you come up with some dates where people are available to receive us for presentations, and maybe you could put a shareable spreadsheet out that we could sign up for in between meeting times, and then just give us a heads up that new dates have been added and could people go on and fill in. That would be great.
Definitely qualifies as scheduling and not deliberation.
Exactly.
I will absolutely follow up on that once I have access to dates.
Fantastic. All right, then. With that being said, I'll move on to liaison reports. Does anybody have any liaison reports to give at this time? Mike, please. Oh, I still can't hear you. No. You're still muted. I'm going to ask to
Hold the space bar down, you can talk.
try holding the space bar back down, see if that, there you go.
There, it's a different one.
Okay.
So we have this, the EDC has a new person in charge, Joyce, and actually we gave a brief presentation of the point of view to the EDC committee last week. And I think it went well, although we had some technical issues with Zoom and PowerPoint. But I think their questions to us were completely different than the questions you're asking today. And they want to know about long-term debt, it's going to be an override, and issues like that. And we got to be prepared to talk about that versus 18-year-old kids in the school system.
Agreed, and that is part of our point of view and part of our, our recommendations and ongoing discussion. But a big portion of the groups that we present to includes the school committee, and the PTSOs. So we need to be able to talk about all of these aspects. Okay, do we have any other member reports? Nothing. It must be a quiet time. We did get a new batch of minutes, but I didn't send it out to the committee, and we'll vote on them in our next meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for, and I'm going to just go through my calendar real quick. The 25th. Yes, go ahead, Jason.
At last night's select board meeting, they requested all committees meet remotely for the rest of January and February. I'm assuming you'd like to take a sense of the committee if we're okay with that?
I would. Thank you for reminding me. And you reminded me of one other thing as well. So sense of the committee, the select board is not requiring us to meet remote. They strongly suggest, especially committees that can have a higher level of attendance or meet in smaller, tighter spaces. We typically meet in a big room with a lot of opportunity for spreading out. In theory, we could meet in person. My preference at this point, and at least for the next month, possibly month and a half, as we watch the Omicron numbers, would be to continue to meet remote and then move back to in person as soon as it becomes apparent that that's safe to do. Does anybody have any strong objections to continuing to meet remote for the short term?
No.
Okay. Great. Then I will go ahead and plan probably to meet remote. And then our last meeting of February, we can reconsider. We can watch what everything looks like and have another discussion about that. The other thing that happened at the select board meeting is that they began a DPW facility study committee. They launched an initiative for a DPW facility study committee, and the committee will include a member of the select board, a member of the finance committee, green advisory board, town manager or designee, public works, and 4 community members. I have no information yet on when that committee will meet, but I am interested in knowing if particular members would like to volunteer to sit on that committee. Roland, you're blurry, but I'm pretty sure your hand's up. Excellent. Anybody else gonna fight, arm wrestle, thumb wrestle? Adam, go ahead.
I'm just saying I would volunteer as well.
Okay. Why don't we leave it for now. We have 2 potential volunteers. I will let the town know, and when we hear what the scheduling looks like, then I'll let you guys tussle it out and we can figure out who's going to represent us going forward on that committee. And we are obviously pleased to have been formally included in that process. We can let Dean know, it says in my chat, so we will let Dean know who our member will be. Excellent. Thank you, David. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to say before I accept a motion from Isha? Christy.
Is it safe to assume that next Thursday's budget meeting will be remote? Have we heard anything about that?
Oh, next Thursday's budget meeting is absolutely remote. So the sandwiches that were previously promised have been taken off the table. You're going to have to make your own sandwiches. Sure,
Well, I'll save the budget for next year anyway.
there you go. Do Acton a favor and order a sandwich in from one of your favorite local businesses.
It was very disappointing because I had to have a remote birthday party with my grandson on Sunday for the second year in a row.
Oh, no. We will get through this. We will come out the other side. Everybody stay healthy. Isha, I will entertain a motion at this time.
I move to adjourn the meeting today.
Here a second. All right. Given that we are remote, I need to do a roll call vote. So I will go ahead and just do that real quick. Adam.
You're muted.
Mike.
Aye.
Oh, good. Mike. All right. Jason.
Aye.
Christy.
Aye.
Isha.
Aye.
Dave.
Aye.
Roland.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
And me, I say aye. Everybody